What happens when a simple question on live television detonates into something no one on The View saw coming? When Mila Kunis, calm, charming, effortlessly composed, suddenly stops smiling and fires back at Joy Behar with a clapback so sharp it freezes the entire studio. The applause faded as Mila Kunis crossed the stage with that easy, confident energy audiences loved. She looked relaxed, waving, smiling, wearing that subtle grin that said she'd been through enough interviews to know exactly how to ride the waves of daytime TV. The set lights bathed her in warm gold as she took her seat between Sunny Hostin and Joy Behar. But even from the opening seconds, something in the room felt tight. A tension she noticed but didn't acknowledge. "Welcome back," Whoopi said, her tone warm but steady. "We are here with the hilarious, talented Mila Kunis, talking about her new film." The audience cheered again. Mila nodded, laughing softly. "Thank you, guys. It's good to be here." Sunny leaned in first. "Mila, the film deals with identity and boundaries. I think a lot of people, especially now, are rethinking what they're okay with." Mila nodded thoughtfully. "Absolutely. The movie taps into the idea that your story is yours, and that sometimes people think they know you, your choices, your intentions, because they've seen you grow up on screen. But they don't really, you know." "Ham," Joy said, her smile widening in that way the audience knew very well. The kind that meant a sharp turn was coming. Mila didn't see it yet. She kept her hands folded lightly in her lap, posture still relaxed, still open. "So," Joy continued lightly, "speaking of people thinking they know you, I want to ask something viewers bring up all the time." Mila glanced over with a polite grin. "Okay." Joy tilted her head. "Do you ever feel like you play innocent about certain decisions you've made publicly? Like sometimes you dodge accountability by staying charming? I mean, people online say." Sunny sucked in a sharp breath. Whoopi's eyes widened. Even the audience gasped like someone had just thrown a glass of water across the table. Mila froze. Only for a second, but it was enough for the tension to thicken like fog. "Play innocent," she repeated softly, as though tasting the words. Her smile faded an inch. "Joy, I'm not sure what you're referring to." Joy shrugged. "Well, just in general. When things get controversial, you seem to soften your way out of it." Mila's eyes narrowed, barely, but visibly. That tiny shift was the first crack in her composure. She crossed one leg over the other, her fingers pressed together. A change. A switch. Then she breathed out through her nose and looked directly at Joy. "I think that's a pretty unfair assumption," she said, her voice low, steady, unmistakably firm. "And I don't soften my way out of anything. If I have something to say, I say it." The audience murmured with a ripple of awe. Joy blinked, surprised, but not retreating. "I'm just asking what people want to know." Mila nodded once, sharply. "Okay, but if people want to know something, ask it directly. Don't hide it behind people online say." "What you want to ask me is what exactly?" A charged silence. Joy's smile stiffened. "Well, no," Mila interrupted gently but firmly. "Say the actual question." The studio went still. Sunny lowered her notes. Whoopi leaned back like she was bracing herself for a sudden storm she had no intention of stepping between. Audience members leaned forward in unison, breath held. Joy cleared her throat. "All right. Fine. Let me be specific. Some viewers feel that, in the past, you—" "Joy," Mila cut in again, her tone now steel wrapped in velvet. "You're framing this like I owe strangers on the internet a personality explanation." Joy opened her mouth, but Mila kept going. "And I don't. I don't owe them an explanation, and I certainly don't owe them permission to rewrite who I am for clicks, assumptions, or entertainment." The audience erupted, half gasps, half applause. Joy blinked, thrown off balance. "Well, I grew up on TV," Mila continued, her voice rising just an inch, enough to show she wasn't playing. "So people feel like they've seen enough of me to decide what I am. That doesn't mean they are right. It doesn't mean they get to accuse me of pretending." She paused. The silence tightened. "And I really don't appreciate the word innocent being used like it's an act I'm putting on." Joy tilted her chin. "I wasn't accusing." "You implied," Mila corrected instantly. "An implication is just a softer accusation." A stunned ooh rolled across the studio. Sunny tried to diffuse it gently. "Joy's just asking for clarity, I think." But Mila shook her head. "No. What she did was throw out a vague, loaded statement and expect me to defend myself against a feeling, not a fact." Joy's lips pressed together. Mila leaned slightly forward, her gaze steady, unblinking. "Let me tell you something about me," she said. "I'm direct. I'm honest. If there's something I need to own, I own it. But I won't perform guilt for people who want drama, or who want to project something onto me because they've watched me grow up." Her voice softened, dangerously calm. "And I really won't let someone else define my character for me. Not even here." A collective shock rippled through the audience. Someone in the front row mouthed, "Wow." Joy finally spoke again. "So you feel misjudged?" "I feel misphrased," Mila replied instantly. "And misinterpreted. Which is fine. But don't confuse perception with truth." This time, the audience applauded, loudly. So loudly that Mila looked down for a moment, collecting herself, before lifting her chin with a controlled breath. Whoopi jumped in quickly, like she'd been waiting for the smallest opening. "All right, let's keep this conversation alive, but let's keep it respectful. We'll be right back in a moment." The audience applauded again, but the energy was electric, buzzing, shaken, alive. And yet, Mila wasn't done. Because just before the cameras cut to commercial, the microphone still hot, she leaned slightly toward Joy and said quietly but clearly enough for everyone in the first rows to hear, "You could have just asked me what you really wanted to ask." Joy stared at her, speechless. And the screen faded to black. The cameras cut, but the tension didn't. It hovered over the table like heat rising off asphalt, invisible but scorching. Mila sat back in her chair, her expression calm but tight. Joy kept her eyes on her note cards, flipping them even though she wasn't actually reading anything. Sunny glanced between them, eyebrows raised, while Whoopi pressed her palms flat on the table like she was grounding herself. Stagehands rushed around fixing lights, powdering faces, adjusting microphones. But even they seemed quieter than usual, whispering as if the air itself might crack under too much pressure. Mila shifted slightly, crossing her arms, not defensively, but decisively. She wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Joy finally cleared her throat. "You know," she said, lightly, but with an unmistakable edge, "you could have just answered the question." Mila turned her head slowly. "I did answer. You just didn't like the answer." Sunny's lips parted. She whispered under her breath, "Oh boy." Joy raised her brows. "Mila, come on. You know this is a talk show. We ask what the audience wants to know." "No," Mila said softly. "You ask what keeps the show interesting." Joy blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," Mila continued, her voice even but pointed, "you didn't ask that because viewers are confused. You asked it because you wanted a reaction." Joy leaned back in her chair, folding her arms now. "Oh, please. Don't make it sound like I'm out here trying to set traps." "Aren't you?" Mila asked, her eyes holding Joy's without flinching. "Because the question you asked wasn't about the film. It wasn't about the topic. It was about me. About my character." Joy's jaw tightened. "Well, if people have questions about your character, they can Google me," Mila said sharply. "But don't ask me something vague and then expect me to fill in the blank with a confession." Sunny jumped in, trying to soothe the fire. "Maybe we just..." But Mila wasn't finished. Joy shook her head. "Honey, you're being too sensitive. It wasn't an attack." Mila let out a soft, humorless laugh. "That's the second time you've implied something instead of saying it directly." Joy looked up. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Mila replied, "if you wanted to bring up something specific, you should have. Instead of phrasing a question like I'm guilty of something mysterious." Joy exhaled loudly. "God, you're twisting my words." "No," Mila said calmly. "I'm clarifying them." That line hit the table like a dropped weight. The floor manager called out, 1 minute, but even his voice wavered slightly. Whoopi leaned toward both women. "Ladies, let's all take a breath before we live again." Mila stayed silent, eyes focused ahead. Joy sighed. "Look, I'm just saying, sometimes these conversations get blown out of proportion." "Because of the way they are framed," Mila replied instantly. "And I'm asking for respect. That's all." "Respect goes both ways," Joy shot back. And Mila, still perfectly composed, nodded. "Exactly." The energy was so intense the audience waiting behind the cameras had quieted, watching every micro-expression like fans in the front row of a boxing match. The stage manager lifted his hand. "Back in 5, 4. Joy and Mila both straightened in their chairs. 3, 2. The music swelled, the lights brightened, and millions of viewers rejoined the show mid-tension. Whoopi smiled tightly. Welcome back. The audience clapped, but it wasn't normal applause. It was cautious, like they were clapping with one eye open. Before the break, Whoopi continued, we were having a spirited conversation with Mila Kunis about her new film. And clearly, she added, her tone dry, emotions are high. The audience laughed nervously. Mila placed her hands in her lap again, her demeanor cool but watchful. Joy looked at her with a stretched smile that didn't touch her eyes. So, Mila, let's pick up where we left off. You were explaining your perspective. Mila nodded. A slow breath. Controlled. I was, she said. And my perspective is simple. I'm here to talk about the work, my work. And yes, I've made decisions in the past. Some good, some bad, some complicated. I'm human. But being human doesn't make me calculated or manipulative. She paused, eyes softening for a moment. It makes me honest. The audience clapped again, louder this time. Joy waited for the applause to fade. No one said you were manipulative. Mila looked directly at her. You implied I appear innocent on purpose. That's the definition of the word. Joy hesitated, only for a heartbeat. All right. Maybe I worded it badly. Mila's gaze softened an inch. Thank you for saying that. A collective breath left the room. But the peace didn't last long. Joy lifted a card. But since we're being direct. Sunny immediately whispered, oh no. Joy continued, I think some people are confused because, well, you and Ashton had that moment a few years ago where. Mila's entire posture changed. The audience gasped. Sunny stared at Joy like she'd lost her mind. Joy, don't. But Joy was already mid-sentence, the ignited match flying through the air. You two defended Danny Masterson, and people thought. The sound of the studio dropping into absolute silence was almost audible. Mila's eyes closed for 1 second. 1 second too long. She opened them, and there was no smile left. Only a quiet, heavy resolve. Joy, she said, her voice low but shaking with emotion beneath its calm surface. We're not doing this. Joy raised both brows. I'm just asking a question that. No, you're reopening wounds, Mila snapped. The audience went dead still. Mila continued, her voice trembling now, but controlled. You don't know what that situation was like. You don't know what we endured privately. You don't know the regret, the guilt, the conversations, the therapy, none of it. And you don't get to drag it back up to score a moment. Joy's mouth opened slightly in shock. Sunny's hand flew to her chest. Oh my God. Mila swallowed hard, turning directly to the audience. I will talk about my work. I will talk about my growth. But I won't have my personal pain turned into a spectacle. The audience erupted in applause, long, roaring applause. People shouted yes, from the back rows. Joy froze, completely thrown. And for the first time since she sat down, Mila's voice faltered, not in weakness, but in rawness. You don't know what someone is trying to heal from, she said. So don't pretend you're helping by reopening what you didn't live. A shaky exhale escaped her. Whoopi stepped in immediately, sensing the emotional weight. We're taking a break. The music hit. The cameras faded out. But the storm between Joy and Mila? It was only gathering momentum. When the cameras cut again, Mila stayed perfectly still, shoulders lifting and falling with one long, controlled breath. The studio buzzed with a kind of stunned quiet, crew members moving slower than before, glancing at each other with raised brows as if silently asking, did that really just happen? Joy didn't speak. She stared ahead, mouth slightly open, like she was replaying the last minute in her head and only now realizing how deeply she'd struck a nerve. Sunny leaned back in her chair, looking genuinely upset. Whoopi rubbed her forehead and muttered something like, Lord, help me, under her breath. The tension wasn't just in the air, it was in the walls, vibrating like they were holding back a thunderclap. Mila finally spoke, and her voice was soft, too soft. You crossed a line. Joy's head turned sharply. Excuse me. Mila didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look angry. She looked tired. That was somehow more powerful. You crossed a line, she repeated. A personal one. Joy blinked rapidly, defensively. It was a public situation. I didn't bring up anything people wouldn't already know. That's not the point, Mila said. Just because it's public doesn't mean it's fair game for ambush. Ambush? Joy echoed with a scoff. No, come on. Mila. Sunny suddenly cut in, her tone uncharacteristically firm. Joy, it was an ambush. Joy turned to her, stunned. Sunny. No. I'm serious. Sunny pointed calmly but clearly. You blindsided her. And you know you did. Joy's face hardened. So what? We're going to pretend we can't ask tough questions anymore. Mila finally looked at her again. Ask them. Directly. Honestly. With respect. But don't weaponize people's pain. Joy swallowed, caught between defending herself and realizing, too late, the depth of the wound she'd pressed. Before she could respond, the stage manager stepped in. Back in 30 seconds. The air froze again. Mila leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. Joy, listen to me. I'm not your enemy. I came here because I respect this table. But respect goes both ways. Joy's jaw tensed, but her eyes softened, barely. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't defiance either. It was something uncertain, something shaken. Whoopi placed a hand on the table, speaking quietly. Let's just get through this next segment without anyone going for blood. Mila didn't smile. Joy didn't either. 10 seconds. Everyone straightened themselves like soldiers preparing for battle they didn't want but couldn't avoid. 5, 4, 3. The lights snapped bright. Welcome back, Whoopi said, her voice smoother, more serious. We are having a powerful conversation with Mila Kunis. The audience applauded, but the applause felt different now. Heavier. Like they were clapping for someone's courage, not for entertainment. Mila offered a gentle nod to the crowd, her expression open but wounded in a way she wasn't hiding anymore. Sunny leaned in softly. Mila, you said something before the break. About healing. Do you want to expand on that? Mila paused. A long moment. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. Yeah, she said quietly. I think when you've lived through something difficult, something messy, something that you wish you had handled differently, you don't just move on. You grow through it. You sit with it. You learn. Joy looked down at the table. And people, Mila continued, don't always understand the nuance. They see headlines. They see sound bites. They don't see the private conversations at 2 a.m., the guilt, the lessons, the therapy appointments, the tears, the apologies you say to yourself. They don't see the humanity. They see a name trending. The audience murmured in empathy. And I get that. That's the price of being in the public eye. She exhaled, her voice trembling softly. But it's still painful. Joy finally looked up. Her voice was quiet. I didn't mean to cause pain. Mila met her eyes, expression soft but honest. Intent isn't impact. Joy closed her mouth, guilt settling over her like dust. Sunny reached across the table and gently touched Mila's wrist, a small gesture of support. Thank you for sharing that. Mila nodded. She didn't wipe her eyes, even though they shimmered. She kept her composure, but she didn't hide the emotion either. It made the moment feel raw, real, human. But then Whoopi, trying to steer the show some way safer, asked something neutral. So, Mila, tell us more about how this film helped you reconnect with yourself. Mila smiled faintly. It reminded me that people evolve, and that we deserve the chance to become better, without having our worst mistakes dragged out every time we try to move forward. Another wave of applause. But Joy was still struggling. You could see it in her shoulders, the way they fell slightly with each breath. Her eyes stayed locked on Mila, not defensive now, just stunned by the unexpected vulnerability. Then, as if unable to stop herself, Joy spoke. Mila, she said quietly, do you really think I was trying to hurt you? Mila hesitated, not to be dramatic, but because she gave the question weight. I think, she said gently, you were trying to make good television, but you forgot there's a person sitting right across from you. Joy exhaled sharply, almost like she'd been hit. The audience reacted, a mixture of gasps and applause. And then, something rare happened. Joy didn't fire back. She didn't joke. She didn't deflect. She looked down, nodded slowly, and whispered, okay. Whoopi glanced at the camera, sensing the emotional gravity. We'll be right back. The music faded in. The lights dimmed. And this time, when the cameras cut, Mila didn't look angry. She looked relieved. But the real confrontation, the one that shook the entire studio, that was still coming, next. The moment the cameras cut for the final commercial break, the studio became a different world, one without applause, without bright lights, without the safety of performance. Just silence. Thick, pulsing silence broken only by the faint hum of the overhead rigs. Mila exhaled slowly, her shoulders rising and falling as though releasing the emotional weight she'd been carrying since the confrontation began. She dabbed the edge of her eye with a tissue a makeup artist had handed her, but she wasn't crying. She was steadying herself. Joy sat rigid in her chair, staring at the tabletop as though the grain of the wood suddenly held answers she'd missed. Sunny leaned back with a long sigh and whispered, "This is a lot," while Whoopi simply shook her head, rubbing the bridge of her nose like she had no intention of playing referee but somehow was still stuck in the role. Crew members whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads, some wide-eyed, all of them aware that whatever was happening on this stage was going to explode across the internet the moment cameras turned back on. Mila broke the silence first. "I didn't come here to fight," she said softly. Joy responded without lifting her head. "I know." The words were simple, but they weren't hollow. They carried sincerity, regret, maybe even embarrassment. Joy's voice, usually sharp and bold, was now small, like she was confronting her own misstep in real time. Mila sighed. "I came here because I've always loved this show. I grew up watching women talk about real things. Honest things. And so I agreed to be here because I thought it would be safe." Sunny winced at that word, safe, because it hit too close to the reality of what had just occurred. Joy finally looked up, her eyes softer. "I didn't mean to make you feel unsafe." Mila swallowed. "But you did." Joy didn't argue this time. She didn't defend herself. She only nodded. One of the producers signaled from behind the cameras. Back in 60. Everyone adjusted their posture again, like preparing for another emotional round they weren't ready for but knew couldn't be avoided. Mila sat straighter, her fingers interlocking tightly in her lap as if anchoring herself. Joy wiped the corner of her eye, so subtly most people wouldn't even notice. Sunny whispered to Mila, "You handled that with grace." Mila shook her head. "I handled it with honesty." "Sometimes," Whoopi said from the other end of the table, "those are the same thing." Back in 10. The women shifted forward, facing the camera again. 5, 4, 3. The lights flared. Music faded out. And the show returned live. Whoopi looked into the camera with the steady, grounding tone only she had. "Welcome back. Before the break, we had a very real, very emotional moment with our guest, Mila Kunis." The audience clapped gently. No cheers, no whistles, just heartfelt applause. Whoopi continued. "This show has always been about tough conversations. About honesty, perspective, and hearing each other out. And sometimes those conversations get uncomfortable." Mila nodded, her gaze soft but clear. Joy looked out at the audience, inhaled deeply, and finally said, "I want to say something." The studio went silent. Every crew member froze. Every viewer at home leaned forward. Joy continued, her voice steady but vulnerable in a way that startled even her closest colleagues. "I've been doing this a long time. And I know sometimes I push too hard. Sometimes I phrase things wrong. And earlier," she paused, throat tight. "Earlier, I stepped into something I shouldn't have. And I'm sorry." The audience gasped softly, then applauded. Mila's expression shifted, surprised, touched, and relieved all at once. Joy looked at her directly. "I didn't mean to hurt you. Truly. I thought I was doing my job. But I didn't stop to think about what it might feel like for you to hear it the way I said it." Mila exhaled, eyes glistening. She nodded. "Thank you, Joy." Joy continued, "You're right. People see headlines, and they make assumptions. And I got caught up in that. It wasn't fair." Mila's voice softened. "We all make mistakes." Something eased between them, like a tight knot slowly unraveling. Sunny leaned in gently. "Mila, you were incredibly brave. Sharing your perspective, that took strength." Mila offered her a grateful smile. Then she took a breath and addressed the audience directly. "I think we forget that celebrities are human because we're always on display. And when you're constantly performing, constantly watched, constantly judged, the moments you wish you could take back get replayed more than the moments you're proud of." The audience nodded, murmuring in agreement. Mila continued, "And that's why conversations like this matter. Because healing isn't linear. Accountability isn't simple. Growth isn't immediate. And pain doesn't disappear when the news cycle moves on." The studio remained hushed. Even the stage lights seemed softer. Joy wiped her eye again, then laughed lightly. "You're making me emotional, Mila." Mila laughed too, though her voice still quivered. "That makes two of us." The tension that once felt unbreakable now shifted into something else, something warm, human, tangible. Whoopi leaned forward. If there's one thing I hope people take from what we've seen today, it's this: conversations can get messy. They can get heated. But the moment we stop listening is the moment we lose the chance to understand each other. The audience broke into applause again, this time louder, driven by emotion rather than shock. Mila placed a hand over her heart. I appreciate being heard. I really do. Joy nodded. And I appreciate the chance to learn. Sunny touched Joy's arm affectionately. That's what this table is all about. The studio lights dimmed slightly as Whoopi prepared to close out the segment. But right before they did, Mila spoke once more. And if anyone watching is dealing with public pressure, private pain, or judgment, just remember this: your worst moment doesn't get to define your whole story. Only you do. The audience erupted, this time fully, loudly, passionately. It felt less like a TV show and more like a moment of communal release. Whoopi smiled warmly. We'll be right back to wrap up the show. The cameras cut. But the internet was already exploding. Staff backstage huddled around phones. Tweets were being drafted before Mila even stood from her chair. Clips were being marked for trending moments. Producers whispered urgently to each other. This is going viral. Twitter's going to melt down. Someone get legal to review the segment. Mila stood. Joy stood too. They met in the middle of the table. Not a dramatic hug, not some staged conveyor moment, but a simple, genuine nod. Mutual respect restored. Joy extended her hand. Mila took it. Thank you, Joy whispered. Thank you, Mila replied. The audience, still seated, still murmuring, watched the small gesture like it was part of the show. But it wasn't. This was real. Raw. Human. By the time Mila stepped off the stage and into the wings, her phone was already vibrating non-stop. Notifications, headlines, messages from friends, questions from journalists. Sunny caught up to her briefly and squeezed her shoulder gently. You handled that with so much heart. Mila smiled. I tried. Try. Sunny said with a grin. Honey, you did. And then Mila disappeared backstage, leaving behind a studio that still buzzed with the aftershock of everything she'd said. Online, the reaction was instant and ferocious. Clips exploded across social media. Hashtags shot up the trending page. Fans defended Mila. Commentators dissected Joy's line of questioning. Think pieces drafted themselves in real time. The confrontation, raw, unfiltered, emotional, became the center of the cultural conversation within hours. But the real story wasn't the clash. It was the vulnerability, the humanity, the strength it took for someone to stand their ground, not with aggression, but with truth. And now it's your turn. What did you think of Joy's question? Was Mila right to clap back the way she did? Did Joy go too far, or was it a fair question? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know exactly how you feel about this explosive moment. And don't forget, subscribe to Talk Narrative for more dramatic, emotional, cinematic stories from inside the wildest moments on your favorite talk shows. More confrontations, more honesty, more stories that pull you right into the heart of the moment. I'll see you in the next one.